You remember when people just disappeared? Not in any dramatic way. They moved, switched schools, took a job in another city, and unless you had their home number scribbled in a notebook somewhere, that was it. They became a memory you carried completely alone. If you were born between 1976 and 1985, you belong to something researchers call a microgeneration. Not quite Gen X, definitely not millennial, you're a Zenial. And there's a very specific kind of exhaustion you carry that almost nobody around you really understands. It's not physical tiredness. It's chronological exhaustion. You feel older than you actually are because you've lived 2 full lifetimes in the span of 40 years. You're a living bridge between 2 completely different eras of human consciousness. And the friction between those 2 worlds has been quietly wearing you down in ways you might not even have the words for yet. Here's what makes you different. You still feel a tiny jolt of dopamine when a phone actually rings, but you almost never pick it up. You know exactly how to read a paper map, yet you freeze the second your GPS drops signal for 10 seconds. You show up 5 minutes early to everything, because you grew up in a world where on time already meant late, and there was no way to text running behind to a landline. You probably still carry a pen and a notebook, not because you're rejecting technology, but because your brain trusts the feeling of ink more than something floating in a cloud. You organize your files into neat little folders because you remember when finding something meant digging through an actual drawer. You still buy physical copies of the books you love because deep down, you don't entirely believe the internet will be here forever. You rehearse what you're going to say at the grocery checkout, not from anxiety, but from an old habit of efficiency, back when talking to a person was a live, unedited event. You look at a sunset and feel a split-second urge to photograph it, and then a wave of tiredness at the thought of having to share it. You're caught in what psychologists are starting to call the analog-digital cusp. And this isn't just nostalgia. It's about running 2 completely separate operating systems inside one single brain. What's actually happening inside you is a kind of dual-environment cognitive load. Research on brain development shows that the world we live in during our formative window, roughly ages 12 to 22, permanently wires our expectations of how life is supposed to work. And for you, that window got split right down the middle. You had a pre-digital childhood, then digital saturation hit, right as you stepped into adulthood. And that created something very specific. A deep sense of self-reliance, grafted onto a foundation that was built for uncertainty. Let me explain. In your pre-digital years, you learned that if you wanted to know something, you went to a library. If you wanted to see someone, you had to actually be where you said you'd be. You were the engine of your own life. Your outcomes depended entirely on you, your memory, your follow-through. Then the shift came. Suddenly, information was instant, but unreliable. Connection was constant, but shallow. Your brain had to lay a whole new system on top of the old one, and that left a permanent kind of dissonance behind. You crave the stability of the analog world, but you're forced to compete in the chaos of the digital one. Attachment plays a part too. A lot of Zenials develop something you could call an avoidance-secure hybrid. You're secure in your ability to survive offline. You know how to fix things, how to be bored, how to wait. But you're wary of the constant surveillance of the modern web. You feel older because you remember what it was like to simply be anonymous. But here's where it gets complicated. The reason you feel like you've aged 100 years since 2005 isn't only that technology changed. It's that the very nature of technology flipped. Back in the late 90s, early 2000s, technology was a tool you used. You sat down at a computer, you finished something, you walked away. Today, you're not using the technology. The technology is using you. You're the data. You're the content. You're the engagement number feeding the algorithm. And as a Zenial, you feel this shift in your bones because you remember the before. When the computer was a place you went to, not a thing strapped to your hand all day long. Younger generations don't feel the weight of it because they have no memory of the silence. They don't know what's missing. Older generations brush the digital world off as something they can just opt out of. But you can't opt out. You're what some sociologists now call the bridge generation. You build the systems. You manage the teams. You raise the kids. You fix your family's Wi-Fi. And then you spend the weekend in the woods with no phone at all, and still never feel fully settled in either place. You're the translator between two groups of people who speak completely different languages. And translation is exhausting work. This is the real contradiction at the center of who you are. You're self-sufficient, but secretly aching for relief. You're fluent in the digital, but worn out by it. You're independent because you had to be, and yet you're drained by the endless demand for your attention. You're skeptical of anything new, and somehow, you're still the first person everyone calls the moment something breaks. You guard the analog past while building the digital future, and both sides make perfect sense. Your self-reliance came from a childhood where your parents had no idea where you were for hours, and that was completely normal. You learned to solve problems alone, to entertain yourself, to sit in boredom without anyone rushing in to rescue you. Your digital fluency came from stepping into adulthood right as the internet promised to connect everyone and fix everything, before any of us realized it might quietly make some things harder. You can hold both. But holding both has a cost. And there's a quiet grief at the heart of the Zenial experience. The safety of being forgotten. You grew up in the last era where mistakes went undocumented. Your teenage embarrassments, your first heartbreaks, your clumsy, awkward in-between years. They're tucked away in shoeboxes under the bed, not indexed in some searchable database. But now you live in a world where everything is permanent. And that creates a kind of low hum of vigilance that ages the soul. You're constantly watching your own digital footprint, while mourning the days when a footprint was just something you left behind in the dirt. You're mourning the patience that boredom used to build. Those long, slow afternoons that forced you to think, to imagine, to just exist, with no feedback loop. You feel old because you're grieving a version of being human that allowed you to grow without an audience. And you're doing it in real time, while everyone around you keeps moving forward, never noticing what got left behind. But here's what you need to hear. That chronological exhaustion isn't a malfunction. It's proof of an enormous skill. You're essentially a living record of what it means to be human in both worlds. You understand the value of one deep, focused hour of work. You know that real stability isn't something you find online, it's something you build, with your hands, in the physical world. You can navigate digital chaos while holding on to analog values, in a world that keeps changing faster than anyone expected. Being the bridge is heavy, but it's also vital. You're not just an old millennial or a young Gen Xer. You're the keeper of a transition that will never happen again in human history. You carry both worlds inside you. You can see what was gained and what was quietly lost. And that perspective is getting rarer every single year. Bridges carry weight. That's what they were built to do. That feeling of being older isn't early aging. It's pattern recognition across two worlds that don't quite connect. It's the quiet signature of someone who lived through a phase change and kept both states alive inside them. You're not falling behind. You've just traveled further than most people realize. If this finally put words to that strange, quiet fatigue you've been carrying, subscribe. I make videos like this, digging into the hidden psychology of how we actually live. I've got others exploring this from different angles, and I genuinely love to have you in the conversation. Take a breath. You're exactly where you need to be.